You're listening to Orange Blaze, a Florida Trail podcast.
Yeah, so let's just point out the obvious right off the bat that the Florida Trail is a winter through hike, and there's exactly one of those um, in the United States right now. Um, and so, as I was thinking about what to do over the winter of 2019, 2020, the Florida Trail kind of made a lot of sense in a sense. Uh, and if it sounds like I wasn't super enthused about it, I think, frankly, you'd be right.
That was Kevin Larry Boy DeVries, 2020 Florida Trail thru-hiker, and I'm Misty Ridley Little. I crossed paths with Larry Boy first at Billy Goat Day back in January and had the chance to sit down and chat with him a couple of times during that weekend. At the time, he was behind the main pack of the Florida Trail thru-hikers and had been driven up by fellow hiker and trail angel Blue Moon. I kept tabs on Larry Boy during his hike via his blog and on Instagram and knew I wanted to have him on the podcast to chat. His blog is one of those jewel of hiking blogs that you don't really see nearly as often these days, with chronicles of his hiking trips over the last 10 years. You get a glimpse of the excellent trails he's been traveling and a sense that you want to be out there too. Fresh off an aborted Grand Enchantment Trail thru-hike, Larry Boy and I chatted in late March just as pandemic closures were ramping up. We talked about his western hikes, developing hiking routes, and how he found himself in Florida for a winter hike this year. I think you'll enjoy this episode. All right, on to Larry Boy.
The last 2 months I've basically been rained on continuously on like 3 different trails. I just can't get away from it.
Yeah, I was reading through your blog to kind of just get an idea of what to talk about and things like that. And yeah, it sounds like you've been quite wet lately. So
Yeah, I'm definitely growing moss behind my ears and stuff. It's a little depressing, to be honest with you. But you take what the trail gives you. There's no sense in complaining too much about it because you can't change it.
right. Well, speaking of that, a couple things. So you're in Michigan right now, but you used to live in Utah and explored there quite a bit. Why the change?
Yeah, so I grew up in Michigan actually, and then toward the end of college, I went out to Utah, basically with the idea of turning myself into the kind of the hiker I wanted to become. And so I went out there in preparation. This was the year before I did the Appalachian Trail, which was my first long trail. And I went out to Utah with the idea of, well, one, working, getting a job, all that good stuff, but also hiking. And I spent every weekend in the mountains kind of playing around, expanding my skill set. I learned what a cornice was. I saw snow in June for the first time, so that was interesting.
Yeah.
And just kind of generally turning myself into an outdoorsman, which I hadn't really been growing up.
Okay. And so when did you leave to come back to Michigan? Or are you going to go back to Utah eventually, or?
Yeah. So I did the Florida Trail this past winter, 2019, and after that I got on a couple of different trails, and then of course the coronavirus kind of knocked me off trail. It just became clear that the resupply situation was too tenuous. You're going into a lot of small towns at the end of very frayed and long supply chains. And it just wasn't the right idea to continue. So I headed back to Michigan for a few months where my family lives, kind of laying low and then kind of seeing what the rest of the year holds.
Okay. Yeah. So you did get in, at least you got in the Washita Trail, and you were starting the Grand Enchantment Trail, which looks awesome. And I would love to do that one someday. So that's kind of a bummer that you had to cut things short, which I've seen. Obviously, everybody's cutting things short, but well, except for some people on the AT, I still see people on that right now. So
yeah, I can't really advise anybody being on a long trail right now because, like, when you need those services, you really need those services. And if things go sideways, that puts you into a contact with a lot of people. Suddenly you've got to hitch 30 miles to get to the next town to try and get some food, and
yeah,
things are very quickly going to become both difficult and kind of irresponsible, just in terms of social isolation and trying not to spread this thing. So,
yeah.
But yeah, it was nice to get in the Florida Trail and most of the Washita Trail. The Grand Enchantment Trail, I only did like 3 days on it. I love that area. Utah, Arizona, Arizona, and New Mexico. just some really wonderful, wild, overlooked country down there. And I'm definitely going to be back at some point. I just don't know when.
Right, right. No, I think what hit home as you were writing, when it that hit home really was the hitching. Like you could end up at the road and there's less people on the roads right now, so you could be stuck there, with an empty pack and, you know, who knows how many miles you're gonna have to walk to a town.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that reality kind of hit me more than, other people's issues that they're showing. So very smart of you to get off.
Yeah, I mean, the crisis, and we're not going to talk about coronavirus for the entire time today, but I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
important to acknowledge that, the crisis is affecting everyone a little bit differently. Through hikers are generally pretty well off, to be honest with you. All we have to do is cancel a vacation with a fancy title. That's all a through hike is,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
And we've generally got money saved up to go do our hikes, so we're not, living on the edge of starvation. So, we're affected a lot less than a lot of other people who, are dealing with loss of job, loss of family members, maybe even loss of life. So,
Yeah.
it's very hard to complain if you're a through hiker knocked off trail. Are you bummed? Absolutely. I'm pretty bummed myself, but like I'm still very blessed, and I can't complain too much.
Right, right. Yes, I do want to back up a little bit, not just about the Florida Trail, but because as I was looking through your archives and because we chatted a little bit at Billy Goat Day, like you do have a pretty extensive hiking background, not just on trails, but on routes. And, you said you mentioned going to Utah um, to kind of just become an outdoors person. I guess maybe just kind of talk about some of the things you've done in the past, some of your favorite expeditions. I'm interested in your Hayduke Trail stuff, and I also liked your perspective that it's getting crowded, even though it's not crowded in perspective to, like the AT, but how that's, affecting these Western trails that are becoming popular due to social media. So I know that's kind of a lot, but maybe just a little bit of background in all of that.
Sure, yeah. So starting at the beginning, those really bad ideas that you have when you're a student and it comes down to exam time and you're pretty stressed. Like you come up with these like ridiculous ideas, anything to avoid studying for a few minutes, essentially.
Hmm.
Um, and we all get just kind of collectively lose our minds, and that happened to be during my freshman year of college. I got it in my head that I wanted to hike the Appalachian Trail. Now, mind you, I'd only ever done one backpacking trip before. It was about a month earlier. It was down in the Smokies, actually, which is, where I saw the AT running through the park and thought, that's interesting. That trip was a disaster, as everybody's first backpacking trip is. One guy lost his shoes down the river. I've had hypothermia, the whole 9 yards, the fun stuff. But I was bounded and determined to, when I completed my studies, to do the Appalachian Trail. And so, that dream kind of percolated for several years. And like I said, between my junior and senior years of college, I went out to Utah, got some hiking experience, did one very short backpacking trip that wasn't a failure. So that was a milestone, I suppose. And then when I completed college, I did go do the AT. Um, and, that really kind of validated, in a sense, kind of the trajectory I was on because I loved the AT. I had an absolute blast. I had some pretty terrible weather, to be honest with you. I started way too early, at the end of February, got caught in basically a month of snow. At one point we were pushing through about waist-high snowdrifts, which was fun.
Yeah.
Um, but through all of that, I just really enjoyed it. I developed a love of hiking and the outdoors more generally. And that kind of, launched me on the trajectory that I am now. So I went out to Utah, having kind of parlayed that internship into a full-time job. I worked that job for several years. In that time, I started, post Appalachian Trail, I started doing some more off-trail stuff, route finding. The Hayduke Trail was right around the corner. It was my backyard, so to speak. So I did that in sections. I did a few different like off-trail routes in, the greater Yellowstone area, in places like the Wind River Range and the Beartooth Range, which is highly underrated, by the way.
Hmm.
And through all of that, just kind of like really developed my skills as an adventurer. It was a very conscious process of trying to push myself, not in an unsafe way, but just constantly challenging myself to do things that were a little bit farther outside of my comfort zone. So, after several years of working in Utah, I decided, I want to go do a long trail again. I was doing the Haydukin sections, and that was fun and that was great. But, like at the end of 2 weeks, or 1 week or whatever, or even a long weekend, whatever time I was able to spend on the trail, I thought, I want more of this. I want to get back to being on trail for weeks and months on end,
Hmm.
like I had on the AT. So a couple years ago, I left work behind for a while, and I've been on trail for a couple of years ever since. I did the Continental Divide Trail. I did a couple shorter things, basically year round. Last year, I did a combination route that included the Arizona Trail,
Hmm.
my own route through Utah and southern Idaho, and then I picked up the Idaho Centennial Trail from south central Idaho all the way to Canada. So it was
That's
kind of a complete journey from Mexico to Canada, but rather than being on the CDT or on the PCT, it was a combination of National Scenic Trail that definitely exists, is well marked, well maintained, my own route, which exists basically only in my own head and on my maps, and then the Idaho Centennial Trail, which is designated by the state of Idaho, but is largely imaginary. So it's just this wonderful, beautiful, wild adventure um, that I really, really enjoyed and really thought was kind of, in some ways, kind of the capstone of the development as a hiker that I've done over the past 4, 5, 6 years.
right. So is that the route in between you were talking about on your blog?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, it basically consists of 800 miles of the Arizona Trail, 1,000 miles through Utah and southern Idaho. I call it the desert hiking route. I've made maps and stuff like that. Um, a small guidebook available on their website. And then the Idaho Centennial Trail, which uses about 70–80% of it. It's about 700 miles from the Sawtooth Range in kind of southern Idaho to the Canadian border.
Right. So that's pretty cool that you've gone from just basically, being a newbie hiker, in less than 10 years to basically developing your own hiking route. And is anybody else following, or has anybody else been interested in trying to follow your footsteps for that route in between or the desert hiking route at all?
Yeah. I've had several people reach out to me, um, between half a dozen and a dozen, I'd say. I do require so the maps are free and everything. All you have to basically do is email me. Um, but I do require that people kind of prove that they've done a day of trail work in the last couple of years, because I think it's important. By the time you do the route in between, you're going to be someone who's done hundreds or likely thousands of miles on hiking trails in your lifetime. And I think it's important that those of us who are the heaviest users, who benefited from these hiking trails the most, who in a lot of cases, those hiking trails have changed our lives. I think it's important for us to give back. So a day of trail work. Go out with your local nonprofit organization, clean up the trails, build a new switchback, whatever. And more than just having to do it for the sake of getting a set of maps, it's really fun. I don't know anybody who does trail work and doesn't enjoy it, because it's just a blast. You meet a lot of cool people, you do a
Hmm.
lot of cool work, and it's really fun to walk over that trail. A few weeks, few months, few years later, and be like, I built that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's pretty nice. So I have a few people who've already done their day of trail work, who've already gotten the maps, and a few more who have a day of trail work scheduled. So yeah, I think it's never going to be a popular route, because the information that I offer is sufficient, but also kind of bare bones. And you do kind of have to know your stuff. It's not necessarily beginner friendly. A lot of trails are beginner friendly, and that's amazing. I love that. but not every route needs to be like that. And I think the route in between caters to those who say hike the CDT or hike the Hayduke and say like, I want more of that, up the adventure factor.
Right, right. So, and I also noticed that, people keep asking you like, when are you doing the PCT? When are you be a triple crowner? Is because you're doing all these routes, is that kind of why you're finding the satisfaction in everything else away from, these big name trails? Is that kind of why you haven't really attempted the PCT yet, or is that still on your agenda?
Yeah, so one thing that I think is really important is to kind of ascertain your priorities and move in that direction. That's what I did with kind of like my intentional self education when it comes to backpacking. And that's kind of how I approached the decisions to do each different long trail. So I first learned about the PCT. I mean, I kind of vaguely knew about it, but I really learned about the PCT. I can tell you the exact date, in fact. It was a day much like the day that it is today in Michigan, freezing cold, raining. And I was at the, what is that place called? Kincora Hostel,
Hmm.
Bob Peoples' place, if your listeners have hiked the AT, in Hampton, Tennessee. And, Bob Peoples is this very brainy kind of guy, legendary kind of hostel owner on the AT. And he has just hundreds, maybe thousands of books in his hostel. And I read a book about the PCT while I'm sitting next to the wood stove and it's raining outside. And, these pictures of bright blue sunny skies and lingering snowpack and fields of wildflowers look so amazing. And I said to myself, on that day, I'm going to do the PCT someday. And, fast forward 4 or 5 years and, I was kind of deciding, okay, I'm at the point where I'm going to walk away from work for a while and I'm going to do a long distance hiking trail. What one do I want to do? For me, it was really between the PCT and the CDT. But I thought, the CDT is changing very quickly because of changes in mapping technology and navigation in terms of popularity. And I kind of wanted to hike the CDT for what it has been in the past and not necessarily what it's going to be in the future. It's a national scenic trail. Its destiny is to become more PCT like or more AT like or more Florida Trail like. But for the meantime, it's kind of this half finished thing that exists in some places, doesn't exist in others. And I really enjoyed that kind of thing. And I thought, this is my one chance to do the CDT now before it is, before those rough edges get filed off, so to speak. So I did that and I enjoyed that. And I thought I want more of that. So I did the route in between last year. So the PCT has been on my radar for many years, but it's always been the number two. It's
Mm.
never been the number one. And I think this COVID-19 pandemic kind of shows you that even for the most savvy or talented backpacker, which I am far from not at all. Even for someone who could do one of these long trails in their sleep, there's still no guarantees in life. And if if you need to make sure you prioritize the right thing so that you don't ever have that regret and say, oh, I wish I had done the CDT several years ago because it's just not the same now or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's as we sit here recording in the springtime, there's no guarantee that the PCT is even going to be accessible this summer. Maybe and maybe not. There's no sense in worrying about it not now. But it just kind of goes to show you that had the PCT been the number one trail on my list, I think I probably would be a little bit disappointed to be in this state of flux right now. And
Yeah.
I do, Lord willing, hope to do the PCT this summer southbound. I've got a permit and everything, just waiting to see what the pandemic situation is like.
Right. Okay. Um, so with all of that, I mean, what brought you to you're heavily featured in the West. What made you decide, hey, let's go to Florida and hike in the swamps? How did that become on your radar?
Yeah, so I mean, let's just point out the obvious right off the bat that the Florida Trail is a winter through hike, and there's exactly one of those um, in the United States right now. Um, And so, as I was thinking about what to do over the winter of 2019, 2020, the Florida Trail kind of made a lot of sense in a sense. Uh, and if it sounds like I wasn't super enthused about it, I think, frankly, you'd be right. Um, I had heard, I think you actually, a few years ago, do some sort of interview where you're like, the Florida Trail doesn't suck. Um, and I kind of blew it off, because I don't know. I had heard about the Florida Trail while I was on the Appalachian Trail. Chuck Norris and Tigger, um, who are active in the Florida Trail scene, were running a hostel in North Carolina at that time on the AT. So I kind of heard about the Florida Trail, thought, Florida, I don't want to hike there. I kind of heard, I think it was your interview about the Florida Trail, whatever. Um, and then I met a couple of people who had done it. And they were kind of, folks like me, people who like, walking on the trails that are a little bit farther off the beaten path. And I thought, maybe. So I went down there this winter with not a lot of expectations. Mostly as, it's a nice leg stretcher, nice way to begin the season, fun. I'm not super jazzed on it, but, it's something to do. And I like long distance hiking. And I was just really, really surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I think if you're one of the people like me who were pretty skeptical on the Florida Trail, I think you got to go down there and try it for yourself because, if you go in there with the right attitude, I think you're going to be very pleasantly surprised.
Right. So a couple things that I took notes of about your experience on the Florida Trail, and that was one that you were not impressed mostly by the national forests in Florida on the Florida Trail.
Yeah.
And mainly, one was Ocala, and you said it was monotonous, which I hate to say this, I kind of agree. And there are points in it that I do love, and there are points like people love, like the Juniper Prairie Wilderness, and that's like one of my least favorite sections. um, so it's just funny hearing that perspective when so many people are, like, I love the national forests on the trail, but I like hearing other viewpoints. So kind of maybe talk a little bit about that, and it probably has to do with some maybe situational experiences, like you said, Apalachicola was just like totally just sogging wet for you. So, and I think maybe even raining a lot in the Panhandle. So, maybe expound a little bit about that and your experiences with that.
Yeah, so let's just take them in order. So Ocala National Forest, um, I enjoyed like the Hopkins Prairie area. For those who don't know, you kind of go along the edge of kind of like a treed area. So the trees are on your right and the prairies on your left as you're headed northbound, and it's just this winding, circuitous trail, but it is rather pretty. So I must state that for the record. I did enjoy parts of it, but I went through some pretty cold, rainy, nasty days, and I just found the sand pine forests that you're supposed to love to not be that interesting. I really loved the Florida Trail forest for the most part. I think they're by far the most interesting and varied forests I've ever walked through, and we'll talk about that probably later. But in the national forest specifically, it was mostly just a lot of pine. And, this mile looks like the next mile, looks like the next mile, looks like the next mile. In Ocala specifically, I think what really make it are the springs. And I did not stop at the springs. So we're talking about Alexander Springs
Mm-hmm.
and Juniper Springs.
Yeah.
And I've heard nothing but wonderful things about those from everybody. But they were both off trail, and it was just absolutely dumping down rain as I went past those, and I had no desire to stop and haul out my camera, get that all wet,
Yeah.
take a picture of something that won't look good, or to experience something that I'm mostly just looking forward to getting in my tent and being warm and dry. So I missed the springs for good reason because of weather. They were a little bit off trail. And I think that very much changed my experience of Ocala National Forest. I think a better way to think about Ocala would be in terms of the springs, which are nice, the forest, which is blah, but the kind of uninterrupted long stretch of single track, I think you do have to say is nice. So, I'm not necessarily down on Ocala. It just, it just is two main events and a lot of filler. And if the main events aren't worth seeing because of weather, you're left with a lot of filler. And then Osceola National Forest, like, whatever. Like, it's nice. It's short. There's this campground on a beautiful lake, and that's cool. But, it's so short as to be, de minimis, essentially. And then Apalachicola National Forest, I thought held a lot of potential. I think if you did it in nice weather, it'd be nice. But it sometimes, like the trail routing was completely ridiculous. There's these nice, like, national forest roads, that there's no traffic on. And then, sometimes, the guidebook will say something like, leave road to descend into swamp. Like, it says that sometimes. And you're like, no, I'm just not, So I took a little bit of liberties with the trail routing in Apalachicola. Again, because it was cold and rainy, and I slept in the bathroom one night because it was cold and rainy.
Yeah.
And, it's just one of those things, but, do it on a 75-degree day. Yeah, I don't mind walking through some swampy bits, Because, a lot of times the most interesting plants and animals are down there and stuff like that. But on kind of when the weather is questionable, it's simply not worth it. I will say that Bradwell Bay was very interesting. That's a kind of an old growth swampy area in the middle of Apalachicola National Forest. I had a nice afternoon to do that on. I really enjoyed it. It was basically completely dry for me. That was before it just got rained on for like 2 months straight. And I really enjoyed just seeing these gigantic old growth cypress. And that was really neat, really worth it. And it kind of gave me a sense of what the national forests could have been like had I not just hit them in bad weather.
Right. No, Apalachicola is definitely, I will say from experience, in a nice scenery situation, it is beautiful. But I'm like you, some of that section we hiked, it was cold, even though it was sunny, it was still cold outside. And I couldn't imagine if it was raining and cold going through some of that area and being wet, and it was just kind of, I don't know, I agree, kind of poorly planned in some spots. I'm like, we need some alternative routes here that people aren't going to feel bad about taking when the situation calls for it. So I agree with you on those.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to take a pretty flexible approach to trail routing in general. Like, trails are kind of a conduit for me of, moving in the right direction and seeing wonderful things. And if that helps me do that, then great. If there's a better alternative, I have no qualms about taking that instead. So, I would say that particularly in Apalachicola National Forest, pay attention to your map. Don't just follow the trail blindly. A lot of times the trail is the best route, but not always. And, if you have the opportunity to take a better route because it's, dumping down 40-degree rain, do that. No one will hold it against you. And it's between you and your conscience. I don't need to tell other people what to do, but, that's the approach that worked well for me.
Right. So speaking of other swamps, so in Big Cypress, I think you said you started off in some old shoes thinking you were going to get new ones pretty quickly, and then realized new was going to be like hundreds of miles down the trail. Maybe just, talk about, since you did start at Big Cypress, your first experiences on the Florida Trail, were they kind of what you were expecting, or anything like that?
Yeah. So I had some really nice weather going through Big Cypress, and that really made it a pretty pleasant experience, honestly. So people talk about the first 30 miles. So actually, backing up a little bit more, when it comes to the Florida Trail, if you're not kind of informed, you think it's all just going to be really, really easy. And then the miles 20 through 30 on the trail, which is, for most folks, day 2 or day 3, are just really quite difficult. Is Big Cypress, this is kind of really muddy swamp, which
Hmm.
is just all 1 mile an hour terrain. Like, you're trying to like extract your foot from the mud with every step. And it's slow, it's frustrating, but it's also a complete blast because you just look down and laugh. You're like, what am I doing out here? The kind of that attitude of resiliency rather than getting down. You just turn the whole thing to a big joke. And you're like, man, I feel just like completely ridiculous trying to walk through this crap. But it was a lot of fun, and I had a good day for it. I did like a 10, 11 mile day through the worst of the mud and stuff like that. And, I wasn't going very fast or very far, but it was a lot of fun. And when you make it through, there's this just overwhelming feeling of relief. Like I made it through Big Cypress. The hardest thing on the Florida Trail was already right off the bat here. I did that. The rest of it, I'm pretty confident in. So I really love that. I liked seeing the cypress domes and stuff like that because I had never hiked in the southeast, and the different plants and animals I saw out there. I saw a couple snakes. Um, the cypress domes and these magical islands
Yeah.
in the middle of the kind of the cypress swamp where you could actually find dry ground, maybe set up a tent, eat lunch, um, bang all the mud out of your shoes, that kind of thing. Those are wonderful, just so lush, so truly tropical. And I just thought that was great. I enjoyed that a lot.
Okay. Now, you get to the trail by Blue Moon. I can't remember. Did you meet him on the Arizona Trail? Is that how you knew him?
I met him on the Appalachian Trail,
Appalachian Trail. Okay.
somewhere in central Virginia, and we hiked into Pennsylvania together, and stayed in touch, stayed friends ever since.
Okay.
Um,
So, I mean, you had him to help you off, but what other trail angels or interactions with people on the trail did you have? I don't really, I guess I get from your experience, your hiker MO is pretty like solitary. You don't really travel with other people too much, but did you run into other hikers, through hikers on the trail? Were you running into trail angels or hunters or day hikers, anything like that?
yeah, yeah. So in terms of other through hikers, I found the Florida Trail to be surprisingly solitary. Like, you could look through the little sign-ins at trailheads and stuff like that and see that there are other hikers out there. But I only met a very small handful of them while I was actually on trail. I think a lot of that is because there are so many different town options. Like everyone is going to have a different kind of town plan
Hmm.
on the Florida Trail that, it's not like hikers just naturally end up congregating at the same places. Like some people will go into the town of Paisley, for example, right before Ocala National Forest. Other people won't. Some people will send a box to the Rodman campground. Other people will go into Palatka. So there's just a lot of options. So you don't see, all the hikers chilling out at the same one diner in the same town that everybody has to stop
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
So I ended up knowing of the existence of other hikers more than actually meeting them. I never really hiked with anybody on the Florida Trail. I met some people a handful of times. And toward the end, I ran into a couple of people, which is nice. But it was a solitary trail. I think things would be a little bit different. And if you're going to do the Florida Trail and hoping to make friends and hike with people, I would recommend going to the kickoff, which is down at the southern terminus, basically the first week of January most of the time.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people started at the kickoff, met each other there, and hiked, oftentimes the whole way together. I didn't. I started a couple days after the kickoff just because, that's when my family's holiday celebration wrapped up and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So I never made those kind of friendships right at the beginning, which is fine. I'm, like you said, I most of the time roll solo, and I'm happy to do so. But for those who are looking for a little bit more social interaction in their life, I think the kickoff would be kind of key to making those friendships right off the bat. As far as trail angels and other people supporting the trail are concerned, um, let's see here. I, I I think the Florida Trail is a really tight knit community. It's not a big community. You're going to get a lot of kind of like weird looks and questions from folks in town. But I think, those who are kind of in on the secret on the Florida Trail do a really great job of supporting it. So when I got to Crestview, I stayed with Frosty, and that was awesome. I stayed at the legendary Hillcrest Baptist Church
Yeah.
in just outside Bristol, and that was just the best thing ever. Um, I just had so many good interactions with people in the trail community on this trail in a way that it's been a while, frankly, since I've had that. Probably not since CAT. And I think because of the tight knit nature of the trail community, I think it's kind of poised for future success, frankly. I should also mention that I just had this wonderful, just almost surreal experience down just north of Okeechobee. I'm walking on this kind of roadwalk section toward a campsite, and a car pulls down next to me, and just on this like paved county road, not too much traffic, but there was some. And she just stops right in the middle of the road and yells out the window, "Hey, I've been meaning to ask, what you doing?" And I look at my watch, and it's about 40 minutes until dark, and I'm about 2.3 miles away from the next place where I can plausibly camp. And I was like, I do not have time for this. Yeah, I was like, do the right thing. Go over there, be the good trail ambassador. And I walk over there, and we're standing right in the middle of the road talking. There's like cars zooming past us. So I was like, maybe you should like pull over to the side.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she pulls over to the side of the road, and we continue talking. I ask, I answer all the typical hiker questions. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? When did you start? How much did you pack weigh? Do you carry a gun? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she was just this really nice person. And she said, like, I've been meaning to ask for like a week or two now because 40 people have gone by that I've seen, and like I just keep wondering what they're doing. But my husband's like, no, you just can't ask random strangers what they're doing. But I was bound and determined, and I'm so glad I did. I was like, well, if you want to have more of these kind of interesting conversations with interesting people on trail, what I would do is I would just put a 6-pack of lukewarm 7-Up in my car, and when you see a hiker, just pull over, offer him a can of pop, and oftentimes that'll lead to some wonderful conversations. She's like, I just might do that. And so, we said our goodbyes, and she drives away, and I think that's the end of it, right?
Yeah.
About 10 minutes later, guess who rolls back up? She's like, hey, I got you a can of lukewarm Dr. Pepper. I was like, oh, you didn't do that. That's so nice. But she also she says, I looked up your blog, and it looks like you went through the Big Cypress Reservation. I don't usually kind of like lead with this, but I am Seminole myself, and I think that's so cool that you walked through the reservation. And she gives me like a copy of the tribal newspaper and this homemade like patchwork quilted pouch with some like traditional remedies inside. She's like, I want you to kind of like experience the taste of what it's like to be here and be on the reservation. We're a proud people. And I thought that was just the coolest thing. Like, it was this beautifully quilted pouch, which I'm sitting here looking at right now, actually. She did a wonderful job on it. There's like herbs and stuff inside. It's just this wonderfully thoughtful gift. She writes a nice little note of encouragement. And I was just completely floored. Like, that is probably one of the most thoughtful, gifts I've ever received from anybody ever. And it was just so cool to make that kind of connection with somebody. And, in a sense, like this changed her whole understanding of the place in which she lived. And it changed my understanding of the place I was hiking through. So I just thought that was a wonderful kind of anecdote. And it just kind of illustrates to me just kind of the the in the community nature of the Florida Trail. Like so many of our trails are in these like protected artificial corridors. You know, they're in like designated wilderness areas or in large national forests. And Florida has some of that. But much of it is, you know, a lot of times you're walking through wild places that are still inhabited by people. And you have these beautiful interactions. And like you really get to see what like America is like. You know, you walk through suburban neighborhoods in Orlando and past like broken down mobile homes in the middle of nowhere and everything in between. I just thought that was a really unique and really rewarding aspect of the Florida Trail.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing experience for sure. Um, that's definitely been our experience on the Florida Trail. Is wasn't necessarily the so-called trail angels, which are fine. It was the other random encounters, and I think it's those random encounters you find on any trail that kind of really just spark your that make your day, especially if you've had a hard day, or if you're in a situation where like you were in, like, okay, I just want to get to my campsite here, but then you have this, the thing that made getting to that campsite just a little bit better.
Yeah, exactly. It was definitely worth not hiking a little bit. And I think, like you said, you have a lot of those. You have those encounters on other trails, but I think you're even more likely to have it on the Florida Trail because of kind of the small plots of public land. You know, the fact that
Yeah,
you're going past a lot of people. You know, you just have so many more opportunities to have these encounters. You know, it's rewarding. Yeah.
right, right. So I do want to ask you about Billy Goat Day. What your thoughts were on that? I think you were likened to like a trail days on the Florida Trail, which I kind of feel like that a little bit too. It was my first Billy Goat Day too, so it was kind of interesting to experience that. But from your perspective as a thru hiker, just coming off the trail and getting to know the hikers that are on the trail at the same time, but not necessarily around you, how was that for you?
Yeah, I was so glad I went to Billy Goat Days because I met a lot of hikers that, I might have passed or who might have passed me or who were just several hundred miles ahead of me or behind me, who I never would have met otherwise. Made several good friendships out of Billy Goat Days, which was nice, even if I didn't necessarily hike with people that much. I really enjoyed it. It was a chance to um, kind of step away from the daily concerns of where's the next water source that doesn't look like ginger ale, where's the next place I can poop where I'm not going to have traffic roaring past me, all these things that like are very, very pedestrian, pedantic, down to earth concerns, and kind of put the trail in a broader context, and it was really nice to meet. I've talked to Nimble Nomad for a while, and like there's not too many times that you get to, kind of pick the brain of someone who's that experienced, frankly, is legendary, which was awesome. And, just kind of get a better sense of what the Florida Trail is all about. I'm glad I went. I'm not usually a big like trail festival person because groups of like more than 5 people scare me. But it was really really good and really fun.
Good. So I don't want to, go too long on this, but to kind of wrap up a little bit. So what were some of your favorite sections of the Florida Trail, like maybe some highlights and lowlights? You've highlighted a couple good things, but is there anything else that stands out? Any wildlife encounters? And then is there anything that you're just like, oh, I can't believe the Florida Trail had that section or something like that?
Well, let's address the second part of the question first. The hogs and the dogs. And I think anybody who's actually like through hike the Florida Trail probably knows what I'm talking about. Like the hogs tearing up the ground in the southern
Hmm.
part of the southern central part of the trail, like the Kissimmee River section especially, which was an amazing section. To answer the first part of the trail, that was one of my favorite sections. But to answer the second part of the question, the hogs in that section they basically rototilled like this large
Yeah.
area of ground just by rooting around. It makes it almost impossible to walk over. You feel like you have sea legs at the end of it. You're just kind of bobbing and weaving back and
Yeah.
forth, trying to find level ground. That was no fun. And I would definitely recommend on the dogs part of the hogs and dogs thing. I would recommend anybody who does this trail does it with pepper spray. I didn't, um, and I definitely wished I had it sometimes in the northern part of the trail. You're on these long road walks, which are unavoidable. There's really no way you can kind of get around it unless you just hitch it. Um, and a pack of 4 or 5 chow hounds runs out and surrounds you, and there's one of them acting all aggressive, the alpha, and it's like, oh boy, this could end bad. So I'm sure there's been a few people bit every year on the forage trail. So I would say definitely, it's nothing to stop you from doing the forage trail, but it definitely bring your pepper spray and be prepared to use it. On the things and sections that I liked section, I would say the Suwannee River was amazing, and the Asilla, I think I'm saying that right, even though the butchering of Spanish names is something I don't like about the Florida Trail. But the Asilla River section was amazing. You have this entire river that just stops. It flows into this underground sinkhole and is gone. And then maybe it'll reappear and disappear for a while again. And that's amazing. That's incredible. Where else do you see that?
Yeah.
And there's like couch cushions floating in the sinkholes, all the trash that floats on the surface as the river dives underground. It's just really interesting, really unique, really bizarre, frankly. And then Eglin Air Force Base, some of the most, just wonderful, pristine forests with this nice open understory, and wonderful, bridges that are truly works of art, covered in roofing shingles, which great idea.
Yeah.
Keep them from getting slippery. And then finally, I would say the live oaks, wherever they were found. I'm thinking specifically of the Kissimmee River, but everywhere, and anywhere that it wasn't pines, and just the forest in general were just so nice. Usually, forests are the boring part of trails. You do them and they're miles, and there may be interesting things to see, but they're not spectacular. And then when you pop out above tree line on a lot of trails, that's when you start oohing and eyeing. On the forest trail, it's completely the opposite. Anytime you're not in the trees, it's like, it's all right. A lot of times those are your road walks, your bike paths, and it's satisfactory, but not much more than that. But when you get into the forest and there's these like mosses and lichens hanging off these live oak trees, there's big, beautiful open understory, and there's wonderful camping. And like that to me is the beauty of the forest trail. And I think, the Kissimmee River section with all those live oaks and even fruit trees really kind of exemplified that for me.
Right. I also found a quote or something from your blog that, you don't, sorry, I'm going to probably edit this because I don't want to butcher it, but you're trying to say that you don't necessarily hike to have this great transformative experience, that you like to just spend time in beautiful places, and that's why you hike. And I was like, I can relate to that. It's like, you may be having a transformative experience that's really hard to express, but it's not like you're not Cheryl Stray at overcoming, whatever tragedy from your mother's past on the PCT, but you're just out there growing yourself and enjoying these places. And I just say I can resonate with that, and I appreciate that you express that, because I think that's why so many people hike, and it's not always necessarily about becoming one with whatever. So I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but I just wanted to say I appreciated that sentiment.
Yeah, what I would say is that what I've seen over and over on long trails is that people go out there to be a better person or whatever, but that quickly kind of gets lost in the routine of the day-to-day. It's not like you're going to be, noticing progress or change in yourself while you're on the trail, unless you're kicking back at on a 0 day maybe with a cold beverage and just kind of shooting the breeze with your hiking partners. But for the most part, like, transformation is something that happens when you're not looking for it. And if you're out there to be a better person, but aren't necessarily into the hiking part of hiking, I think it's a very easy thing to just quit the trail, because you're going to become disillusioned. If you're truly not enjoying what you're doing, being out in the backcountry, like, I would say start by enjoying it. Start by looking for things every single day that you can enjoy and appreciate. See if you like the rhythm of hiking, and you will be changed by your experience. You will. But it'll happen when you're not looking, Like, at the end of the trail, or even a few years afterwards, you can look back and say, yeah, that changed the whole trajectory of my life. And that's been true for me. Like long distance hiking has definitely had a transformative impact on me. But it happened when I wasn't looking, and it happened only because on a day out basis, I got up and I just enjoyed walking, and I enjoyed being in beautiful places, and I enjoyed having the crickets singing you to sleep at night. Like it's not always fun, but it's a rewarding lifestyle that I've come to embrace. And, enjoy it, and then the transformation will come. Is what I would say.
Right, right. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but hopefully that you will be able to get on another trail later this summer. So hopefully it'll be the PCT, or do you think you'll get back out to the Grand Enchantment Trail sometime?
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. Even this fall, if PCT falls through, or in sections over the years, there's got to be a way to do it.
Right. And I also wanted to mention, I spoke with Eric Schlimmer of the Trans Adirondack route. Have you heard of that before?
I have. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a very interesting, kind of similar concept to a lot of the routes that are being kind of laid down out west. I really have a
Uh,
lot of respect for what he's done there.
yeah, and I was just going to suggest, hey, you should add that on because I talked with him. It just sounds very fascinating and just right up your alley. So,
Yeah, yeah, I'd definitely be interested in that. That's the problem is, as you check one off your list, you immediately add three more.
right.
There's just always more to be done, and that's something that has both its positives and its kind of its downsides. But on the whole, it's a pretty good thing.
Right. Well, do you want to share where you write? You have an extensive history on your blog where people can follow you on where you're writing there, and your social media accounts, anything like that.
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at LB Hikes. That's where LB as in Larry Boy, pretty basic. And then also on lbhikes.com. You can find both kind of trip reports and then also resources for the aforementioned Deseret hiking route, as well as to Highline Trail and some other stuff. Don't necessarily post super regularly, but you can always subscribe for updates or whatever you want to do.
Right. And I meant to ask about your trail name, Larry Boy. Is that from VeggieTales or what's that from?
I won't burn your listeners' ears by singing the VeggieTales theme song on this interview, but yes, it is from VeggieTales. I thought I was singing VeggieTales when I thought I was alone in the woods on the Appalachian Trail, and I definitely wasn't. And in fact, the lady hiking behind me very quietly knew the song I was singing and started singing along, just about scared to
That's
half to
funny.
death.
That's funny. I was like, Larry Boy, I know this from somewhere, and I had to Google it. I'm like, oh, that's what it was. And because my niece, she was really into VeggieTales back, 10 years ago, and that's where it all came together. So I figured that was probably an interesting story, and it sure was.
Yeah, well, for hikers of a certain generation, namely, mine, and who are, children of the '90s or the 2000s, um, just about everybody's heard of VeggieTales, and they always kind of give me this half knowing smile and be like, "Where does that trail name come from?" Like, already. And then I, of course, have to sing the song and blah blah blah.
Right. That's funny. Well, thank you so much for taking time out to chat with me. I'm glad we got to chat. I know you would have preferred being hiking probably, but I'm glad we made it happen.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to chat, and thank you as well for all that you do to promote the Florida Trail. I think it's pretty great, and I listen regularly.
All right. Well, thank you, and you have a great, I don't know, rest period before hopefully you get back on the trail.
A brief rainy day.
All right.
That's it for my conversation with Larry Boy. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe picked up a few hiking ideas for once we're all able to get back on trail. Show notes for the episode can be found on orangeblaze.thegardenpathpodcast.com, and the podcast is on Instagram as Orange Blaze Podcast and Facebook as Official Orange Blaze Podcast. Until next time, happy hiking. At least locally.